All righty, guys. Good morning. Very excited for this show. This is yet another show that we've been trying to set up for quite a while. We've had some technology issues, but we finally just went around the computer, and Mr. Gene is doing a show today from his iPhone, and we had a lot more luck with that. So we're in store not only for a good story. We're going to learn a lot of stuff, but we've got a ton of great photos. And I'm going to end up linking our guest, Nap, his Twitter, or X, I should say now, profile into the show notes to where you can follow him because he shares a lot of his dad's amazing Vietnam photos, and it's one of my favorite pages other than Jason's on X right now. But before I jibber jabber too much, I'm going to let then Lieutenant, retired Captain, Mr. Gene Fitzsimmons, our guest today, who is with 1st Recon Battalion. I'm going to let him introduce himself and get the show started. So, Mr. Gene, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
All right, happy to do it. Good morning to everybody, although I can't see you. I apologize that my wife tells me I have a face for radio, and you guys are stuck with my phone image. But I welcome any questions today, and nothing is off base. So please, everybody, feel capable of saying anything. So that's all I have. Uh, I'll give you a quick and dirty bio. Uh, Joined the Marine Corps in 1968 upon my graduation from college. My father, who is a retired Air Force career officer, suggested that I go, since everybody's being drafted, suggested that I go in the Navy first, the Air Force second, the Army third, and the Marine Corps last. And if I went in the Army or Marine Corps, do not be an infantryman. Now, that's from his experience in World War II, having flown off of Saipan and Iwo Jima. And so he was familiar with what those guys did. Naturally, I joined the Marine Corps and became an infantryman in 1969. The Marine Corps sent me to Ranger School. I was chosen because of my leadership numbers and because I was so tall and good looking. But there were four of us that went, and it was a super experience. 56 days of starvation and no sleep and doing. And it was great training. And from there, when I graduated, I was the only one of four that got 1st Marine Division. And that turned out to be, from my standpoint, fortuitous because the 3rd Marine Division was being pulled out. So the other three guys who had attended Ranger School went to Okinawa and never, to my knowledge, got to Vietnam. I got to Vietnam in September, I guess, of 1969, and I walked into personnel up in Division Hill and handed them my papers, and they said, you went to Ranger School? Yes, sir. They said, well, then I would assume you want to go to Recon. Well, I'd never heard of Recon. Nobody talked about Recon when I was in training. And that's probably because it's kind of a closed and a rather small community, and everybody else was infantry, and so that's where I figured I would be. So I said, yeah, fine, go ahead and send me to recon, and which happened to be right at the bottom of the hill. So I was only 5 minutes away. And so I went down to recon, introduced myself, and I was told that I'd be going to Echo Company, uh, 1st Recon Battalion, and replacing a lieutenant who had blown the tip of his finger off, cleaning his 45. Now, I don't know how you do that, but that he had apparently accomplished that. And so that afternoon, I called my platoon together and introduced myself. And I did not, there were some strange looks, and I did not know about the lieutenant that I replaced. And I'm short in stature, and I will have to say relatively unimpressive in the way of size. So I should have figured on that, but I gave my brief, introduction to my troops, and met my platoon sergeant, who was a picture book Marine. This guy was just a stud, staff sergeant, and big as a house. And it just, I was a happy camper. Everything looked like it was supposed to. And so I went up to our hooch, and it was so late in the day that I did not get to, draw weapons or any of the other stuff. I just went to the hooch, met the guys, and that was it. And of course, that night we got intelligence, and about military intelligence, intel that some Vietnamese regiment, bad guy regiment, was supposed to attack Da Nang. So we went on 50% alert, and we were in a relatively quiet area. We didn't have guys caught, sneaking through the wire or any of the other stuff. It was, like downtown Atlanta for the most part. But for the new guy who had never seen any of this stuff, and never walked around the defenses or anything else, it was new, and I was, my sphincter muscle was puckered, and I didn't even have a weapon. And finally, one of the guys lent me his 45, and so I had a 45 and one extra magazine, and I did my tour of walking the perimeter, and then spent the rest of the night listening to outgoing artillery and expecting to have this horde of bad guys broiling through the wire. None of that happened. So there I was the next morning, not having slept, eating breakfast and readying for my first day in Vietnam. So I went around and started collecting gear and doing all the checking in stuff. And then about 10 o'clock, I got word that my platoon sergeant had led a patrol into the outermost regions, and they had landed and immediately taken fire. They landed right in the middle of a regimental headquarters and in a basin, and they took fire from up above. And my point man had taken a hit in the head, and the platoon sergeant taken a round in the shoulder. Uh, and the big worry was the point man, and the platoon sergeant was supposed to be okay. Well, they got back and went to first med, and the point man just had all I had to do was pop his skull up, and he was fine. It just got in a crease, and so he went out to the hospital ship and was hunky dory and went home from there. The platoon sergeant, on the other hand, was the round had come in at his shoulder, come down, bounced off the scapula, and out his side, and he was in the hurt locker. So I was there. Was first day in Vietnam, and my platoon sergeant's been hit badly, and I went in to see him at first med, and I walked in to the room and was told I couldn't really talk to him, but there he was sitting in the bed right in front of me, and here was a guy whose all his color was drained. He was trembling, and I had never seen anybody who had been hurt that badly. And there I was saying it was quite a shock. He said, "Oh Lord, this is what can happen to you." And I just said, "Platoon sergeant, I'll write your wife and tell her you're okay." And then I bolted. But it shook me very badly that this is what could happen to you. And so I just resolved from there on in that I would not let any more of my people be hurt. It was pretty shaky at that point. So I immediately started off first day in the crack of dawn, really, without a platoon sergeant and without a point man for one of my teams. So I had to find a platoon sergeant and reconfigure my teams and drive on from there. There were no staff sergeants available, I was told. So I had to promote somebody from inside my platoon to be platoon sergeant and educate him as to how to be a platoon sergeant. Well, all of my squads were led by corporals. All of my team leaders were corporals. So here I was picking someone to advance from a position and responsibilities of being a corporal to a staff sergeant role. And so that's pretty, they don't train you for that. And they train you that you're going to be, you meet your platoon sergeant, you shut up and say, "Hey, platoon sergeant, staff sergeant, so and so, teach me what I got to do." I had none of that, and so I interviewed all my corporals, made my choice, and it turns out this is a guy that my choice was a corporal from Oregon who had been given the choice of joining the Marine Corps or going to jail. And I could not have made a better choice, to be very honest with you. He could whip anybody in the battalion and probably had up to that point. but he was a tough son of a gun. And so that was my first day in Vietnam. I had to replace a staff sergeant and take over the platoon and then whatever. So I figured the best thing to do was to get out of town. So I spent the next day getting wired together, and then I went out on patrol, my first patrol, which was thankfully in a very quiet area, probably deliberately. And I got introduced to Vietnam. My first patrol was in what was called the Hai Van Pass, which is north of Da Nang. Very heavily wooded, very heavily forested area. So I got off the helicopter and was immediately lost. Now I was pretty cocky because at Ranger School I had gotten a reputation as being a great navigator. So as soon as somebody got lost, they'd say, "Send us up that little Marine." And so, I'd go to the front, and through luck or whatever, I'd get them where they needed to go. But I got off the helicopter in Da Nang, or in the Hai Van Pass area in the mountains, and I was a lost ranger. I had no idea where I was, and this was the monsoons, so every broken blue line that meant a seasonal stream looked like a roaring river to me. And so I was in the hurt locker. And of course, the troops all looked at me and said, "Okay, where are we now, Lieutenant?" And so, I'd say, "Okay, here we are." So I was lost for my first patrol. Finally figured out where I was on the last day, luckily, and got back safe and sound. Didn't see any bad guys. The Hai Van was very quiet. But it was a humbling experience. All my cockiness was gone. I wasn't a great navigator. I was in Vietnam. You don't know really what you're doing, and you're going to react. And they were all kind of critters, the doggone leeches. You'd stop in the woods, and as soon as you stop, you could look down, and you could see 100 leeches coming toward you. They could smell your blood. So, you spent most of your time picking leeches off of you. So that was my introduction to Vietnam. My troops were by and large little guys. There was nothing. I see my nephews now, who were both Marines, and they're with their platoon, and these guys are studs. I mean, these guys got arms on them as big as tree trunks, and my guys were little bitty skinny guys, and that's where we were. That's kind of what we were. We were just sneaky Pete little guys, and that was how I started my career in Vietnam. My career in the military, let me put it that way, in the Marine Corps. And it was an inauspicious beginning, to say the least. Questions?
Nab, would you like to kind of introduce yourself to the viewers, and then maybe you can start us off on some questions before the viewers get going?
Sure. And I'm going to try to be as brief as possible, because I know all of you guys are here to see my dad, rightfully so, not to hear from me.
Well, we wouldn't be speaking to your father if it wasn't for you. So, much
Well, I
thanks to you
appreciate
as
it.
well.
Oh, I appreciate that. And as my dad said, thank you, Bud, for having us both on. Just a really, really brief history on me. I grew up in North Carolina. My dad was actually one of my high school history teachers, my sister as well. I grew up, and my dad was and still is my hero. And so for me, from day one, I was always going to join the military. Always wanted to be infantry. I kind of went back and forth on Marine Corps versus Army over the years. As I got older, specifically high school, and really started to make serious decisions about it, I really wanted to do the special operations route. I wanted to do something similar to what my dad had done. And so I also was quite interested in his experience at Ranger School. And eventually I settled on the Army thinking, well, this is the best route if you want to go special operations. And specifically, I wanted to eventually join 75th and do the Ranger thing. Unfortunately, so I applied for and received an Army RTC scholarship to college at Wake Forest University. Attended on an Army RTC scholarship, but while I was a cadet, ended up having a blood clot and was medically separated from the Army. So that didn't work out. Now I'm an attorney living in Minnesota. But in any event, that's kind of my background. So I guess, Dad, if we could maybe go back to Ranger School a little bit. I know the audience here is primarily probably Army. And especially at your time, but even now, I mean, a Marine in Ranger School is more or less a rarity.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, we have X number of slots for other branch service members and foreign military. But Dad, maybe if you could speak a little bit more, what did you know about Ranger School? How did you get in? What was it like being a Marine, if that was any different at all? And yeah, just maybe if you could give us a little bit more about that experience.
Okay, sure. I was familiar with the Rangers, of course. With my military history background, I knew about Wanda Hoke and all the other good stuff. I did not, I knew that a lot of the Army infantry officers went to Ranger School. I did not know what the Rangers did in Vietnam, really, as far as long-range recon patrols, etc. Just like I didn't know what recon was. But I've always had the highest respect for what those guys did. So I was chosen, as I mentioned earlier, strictly because of my leadership skills. I don't probably that meant keeping a smile on my face in times of trouble and woe. So 4 of us were chosen out of my battalion, and we went down to Fort Benning, and of course we were immediately said, guys, we have all the foreign military trainees and Marines over here, which was kind of like, we'll baby you guys, and you can you'll be okay. Don't worry. So being a Marine at Ranger School was you got a little bit more grief. They enjoyed making making fun of you, and so you take it with a grain of salt because you know that would be what would happen if they were Army guy in the Marine Corps training. So it was very difficult physically. Fortunately, we were all in pretty good shape. So, oops, right, and so it was, you know, do your 3 mile run and so on pretty handily. But it was very challenging, and I got to tell you, you know, living off of 1 C ration and you know, almost zero sleep was challenging. But that's what we got was 1 C rat a day, and we all lost weight.
Imagine so.
It was you know, you didn't get much sleep, and so it was a heck of a challenge. We were treated fairly, and the training was very challenging. At that point, it was 56 days, and there's there's me and my Ranger buddy, who was backup fullback on the University of Florida's football team. That was fine until you had to do the buddy rappel.
Oh,
6 days was in Dahlonega, Georgia, and you learn how to rappel.
oh,
Learn how to rappel with a wounded man on your back. Well, that meant you and your Ranger buddy, one buddy would carry the other guy down first, and then you switch. Well, you can imagine this guy that weighed 215 pounds
oh.
getting on my skinny little back. He had to have been puckered big time, but we got down okay, and it was a good thing. There you go. That that was about a 60-foot cliff, and it was an interesting experience.
Gosh, and how much they've got the different phases today and everything. And like you said, y'all are here at Dahlonega doing mountain. How much time was spent on the different phases? I'm not all that familiar with Ranger School, what all it's divided into, but I imagine there's a lot to cover in that short amount of time they've got y'all.
Well, it was about, and I don't remember exactly how many days, but it was about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The first third you spent in Fort Benning, learning the basics of patrolling, because that's what it's all about. So you learn the basics of patrolling and all the physical garbage, and they weed out a lot of the people they figure shouldn't qualify. And then we went to Eglin Air Force Base. I'm sorry. Then we went to Dahlonega. And Dahlonega is in North Georgia, and for about a third, and that was mountaineering techniques, patrolling in the mountains, rock climbing, rappelling. And it turned out facing North Georgia rattlesnakes, timber rattlers, because I don't know whether they just unloaded a truckload of them or what, but they were lots of them. And then we finished up in Florida, which is at Eglin.
The swamp phase.
That was the jungle part of it. So, and I don't know if you're familiar with North Florida. I was born there, and fished there and spent summers there and stuff.
Mhm.
But there are lots of rivers in North Florida, which are stream fed, which are cold.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, relatively until they get down further on down. And so, there's lots of river crossing, rope bridges, all this other stuff, gators, snakes, and spiders from hell. And, yeah, it's very challenging. Did I have a question?
We're about to get one. Speaking of that, the river portion, we spoke to someone in Ranger School. I don't know if it was around 68 or it may have been a little bit earlier, or maybe it been after, but they were doing the float portion and they were given weapons and I think only 1 or 2 rounds, and they were like, you better make it count, that one for getting a meal and the other to protect yourself in case y'all get attacked or whatever. And they happened to have come up on a snake, a moccasin, and a boar, and one of the guys was like, don't you dare waste the bullet on that snake. I'll scare it away, beat it or whatever. We're going to kill that dadgum hog and we're going to barbecue it and we're going to eat that hog meat all the way down this river, and which they did. And luckily it worked out and nothing came up that they needed an extra bullet for, but they were in hog heaven, no pun intended. Did you have any instances like that?
Dad, I seem to recall an incident involving a potential meal of a snake.
Yes. We didn't bump into any boars. Okay. Could have easily, but did not.
Oh, yeah.
We did have a lot of encounters with snakes. And once a friend of mine and I were walking, starving to death. Okay. You're hungry as a dickens.
Can't imagine.
A friend and I were walking flank security and we came upon about a 5-foot doggone rattlesnake.
Ooh.
And this was, that's a bodacious snake.
Oh yeah.
And we looked at him and looked at each other and said, meal, food, raw, who cares? And so we were about to go after the snake and beat it to death. And the TAC officer happened to be out wandering around checking on us. And he caught us just before we nailed that doggone diamondback and said, nope, can't do it. And so we were robbed of food. And that was the name of the game. But it was, you speaking of food, I'll do this. We were so hungry, you followed food. So you followed your favorite meal. And my favorite meal, or the favorite food that I had, was a Shoney's strawberry pie. So I followed a strawberry pie all the time at night. And so there you are in a line and assuming at night, and you're following this doggone, I am at least, this Shoney's strawberry pie. Well, that's fine until everybody else's food takes a right and your food doesn't and keeps on going. Literally, you guys wake up, 50 feet out in the woods or 100 feet out in the woods with everybody else following them because their food didn't make a turn with everybody else's food. And it was that we joked about that a great deal.
That's wonderful. I love following your Shoney's pie. This is a good question before we get into Vietnam. This is kind of taking us back in history here, but it's very interesting. Jason was curious, what were your families / friends and relatives or hometown people's thoughts on the war before you joined?
Well, I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is the South, which is
Yeah.
pretty conservative. And there at the big universities, there were demonstrations. I went, like my son, to Wake Forest. There weren't any demonstrations at Wake Forest, which is Baptist and notoriously conservative. But I was raised, I have two brothers. We were raised to figure that we owed some time to the country. So we owed service to the country. Didn't mean a career, but you owed
Something.
service time. Now, both of my brothers, one is 3 years younger, one is 7 years younger than I, and both of them were career military. One was career Navy helicopter driver, and one was career Marine infantry officer. Neither of them served in a war, but that's okay. That makes me happy. So my dad basically raised us that we owed time to the country. So that there was never a question about what I was going to do. The only question was what branch of service was I going to be in. And I already told you, he said, he'd pick Navy first, Air Force second, Army third, and Marine Corps last. And it took me 2 weeks. It took me 2 weeks to muster the courage to tell my dad that I had joined the Marines. And that was very true. And so when I did, he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. We were not. I'll just say it. My dad could have said it's daylight, and I would have said it's nighttime. He'd say this is right, and I'd say that's wrong, and vice versa. I was the first son, and he was learning to be a father, and I was certainly learning to be a son. And so we agreed to disagree. So I told him what I had done, and he kind of looked rough and didn't say anything about it. It was not until way later, after I got out of the Marine Corps, that I asked my parents what they thought about my Marine. And my dad, I think it's grade 6, it's like Brett. They turn you, instead of being the black sheep of the family, I never knew I was, to being a decent contributing citizen. So that was where I was. My mom, I was her oldest son, so she wasn't.
Wow. And you're there. You said, you were joining there at I mean, it had been going on a while, but arguably, well, not even arguably, Tet was the biggest thing going, and you're pretty much getting ready to join, and the VC is all but wiped out, and I mean, they're going to still be around and helping the NVA and all of that. What when you first get through boot camp and you're getting your MOS and all of that, are you looking immediately to get to Camp Reasoner, or what's that like? Where are you trying to get?
Well, I wanted to be infantryman because that's what Marines were. That was my thing, and I wanted to be infantry, and that was it. Nowadays, it's much more difficult to do that because they, of course, there are fewer slots open in the infantry than there were in a war where they were killing lieutenants or wounding lieutenants on a regular basis. So there really wasn't a bunch of there weren't any kind of obstacles to my becoming infantry officer, and so that's what I concentrated on, and it was pretty much a done deal. If you wanted to be infantryman, you got it. The only argument came if you wanted to be artillery or something else, and it depended upon your class rank, whatever. But infantry, I didn't have any trouble to be what I wanted to be.
And so is by 68 and 69, I imagine y'all are taking planes over there, and are y'all landing at Cameron Bay and going from there, or how do you make your way to First Recon?
Okay, I went first to Okinawa.
Okay.
And there we spent close to a week, 6 days, I think, in Okinawa, where we got a gamma globulin shot. Lord help me, that hurt. And so we had our GG shot, and all the other. We had 5 million shots, and you get to the end of the day, and you felt like a pin cushion. They were, welcome to Vietnam things. They talk about diseases and bugs and snakes and spiders and stuff, and that, pretty much designed because a lot of the guys had been there already that you talk to, and so they want to scare you to death, and generally succeeded in puckering your sphincter muscle pretty well, but that was no big deal. And then they flew us from Okinawa into Da Nang, and we flew into Da Nang, and the pilot came on and said, it's being funny, haha, and welcome y'all to lovely Vietnam, and he tipped his wing and let us look at Da Nang, which was a brown smudge with beautiful beaches running down beside it. It was a gorgeous country from the air. It was green, and these beautiful wide beaches. And however, Da Nang was not a shining metropolis. Let me put it that way. And they dropped you off, and you got the enlisted men went one place, and the officers went up to Division Hill, and there you got your assignment. And as I said earlier, I expected to be assigned to an infantry outfit, 5th Marines, 7th Marines, something like that. And then this recon business came up, and so I, immediately went down to recon, which was right down at the bottom of the hill, and So I began my indoctrination there.
Before we dive into this, because there's already a great question that's going to be great. I can't wait for you to answer. But I don't remember you mentioned at the beginning, but didn't you kind of get lucky there after OCS and Ranger school when you, I believe you ran into, on my notes, I apologize, guys. When you first got with the first MARDIV, someone's girlfriend's dad was head of Marine personnel and found out that third was leaving and you were wanting to get into action, and luckily he told you stay put.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my girlfriend.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Linda Hammerbeck.
Yes, Colonel Hammerbeck's daughter, Linda, who was my girlfriend at the time, and he was the head of personnel for the Marine Corps, and I got it. You know, I wanted to go to Vietnam, and he had lost a son in Vietnam, sadly, and so it must have been tough for him. But he kind of made sure that I got to go to first MARDIV. He knew that the third MARDIV was coming out, so I got first MARDIV, and then all the rest of the guys got third MARDIV, where all the openings were in the infantry, and so there it was.
Wow. We've got a good viewer question, and then Nap, if you'd like to take a question or so, or ask a question or so, we'll get into that. But this is a good one since we're getting into recon. Jason was curious, could you explain the differences between battalion and force, and did the two ever overlap when you were there?
In Vietnam, we did the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
okay, which was running long-range reconnaissance patrols. And actually, we did overlap in one area, and that is in checking out riverbanks. And we had guys that were scuba qualified, and even if you weren't scuba qualified, you learned real quickly. And so we'd have these guys would be dropped off from a PBR, a riverboat, and they would go along the banks in the water and feel for hidden caves and stuff under the riverbank, and pop up and check it out, and we'd find ammunition and supplies, and occasionally a bad guy, which would be an unpleasant experience. Now the force guys were all scuba qualified. We were not, and as it turned out, it didn't make much difference. You just said, okay, this is your mask, this is your air tank, this is your regulator. You put your mask on and you breathe through the regulator. So both of us did that, and we also did long-range reconnaissance patrols. Same. And it was under normal circumstances, Marine reconnaissance battalions were not jump qualified. Force recon is jump qualified. They didn't do any jumping into patrols because very early on they tried that, brought people. So we didn't use parachute insertions anymore. So we were pretty much same side of the, or rather both sides of the same coin. And, but Reconnaissance Battalion depends strictly upon how the division commander wants to use you. It's what it amounts to. And he may shuffle you out to company level or battalion level or whatever, or he can use it as we were being used when I was there, you know, as a resource for the whole division, and we'd run reconnaissance patrols all over the division TAOR, tactical area of operations or responsibility. And so we, all over I Corps, we'd run patrols. And those patrols would last generally 6 days if you weren't stuck with bad weather. Or they could have lasted as, you know, short as 6 minutes if you happen to be dropped into a bad place with lots of bad guys and get chased out again. So in the 6 days of patrolling was normal, unless you get to poop. And if you did that, then, you know, your presence was compromised, and you would generally be pulled out if you couldn't break contact and hide. So that was the name of the game for us. And Force did the same thing. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nap, did you want to hop in here?
If I could jump back once more, I guess, before we jump full bore into the Vietnam stuff. And I don't think it's been mentioned yet. Bud knows this, but my sister Cameron's a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps right now. Soon to be retired. But you know, growing up, we always had my dad as a resource, and of course, we had Iraq and Afghanistan going on when we joined, and I know we both made use of that resource. And I'm curious, Dad, what kind of did you talk to your dad much? You know, obviously, he told you not to join the Marine Corps, and you did, but.
Yeah.
But once you knew you were going to Vietnam, did you guys have any discussions about it?
Not really. Surprisingly enough, not really, because number one, I never had. You got to remember, Dad and I were not bosom buds, okay? And I felt like I had stepped across the line when I had joined the Marine Corps, and then said infantryman. You know, I was a bad kid. I was I was the black sheep of the family, per se. But I didn't really, you know, Dad respected me, I learned later, and my training. And he were very heavily respected Marines. He was with the fighter squadron that was first to land in Iwo Jima when the Marines took it, and there was still fighting going on. There was a Japanese banzai attack that got in amongst their tents, and he would never talk about that. And he didn't talk about the war very much at all. But I learned later that he respected the dickens out of me, and respected what the Marine Corps had done for me, and they had done a terrific amount to make me a better man. Of course, I don't know if it's on my bio. I didn't mention it, but I was with 30 days left in country. I volunteered to ride in an Army helicopter, and it
Oh
crashed.
God.
And I spent 13 months in the hospitals, a variety of Army, Navy hospitals. And I I spent a month in Camp Cooey Army Hospital immediately in Okinawa. They zapped all my, there you go. What a handsome devil. Well, they zapped all my infections. And then they sent me to Camp Lejeune. Well, my parents came to Camp Lejeune and saw me. And they got to the door of my room,
I lost it.
and it was kind of like Mutt and Jeff, the old cartoon thing about shoulder to shoulder trying to get through the door. And they seemed to stop, and as if there was some invisible barrier there, and as if they were, just kind of sitting there for a minute and saying, taking it all in, that, hey, is it really him? Is it really he, is the correct English. So it was, it took a while before my parents and I got comfortable with each other. They didn't know, there were all kind of stories about PTSD and what happens when you're badly wounded and all the other good garbage that was in the news. So they really had to feel for what's reality with me, and so they did a great job. They really they were fantastic people, and my mom, of course, had spent 20 years as an Air Force wife, wondering, my dad could have been killed any day flying an airplane, and so she had to deal with all this ahead of time, and so she was an old soldier, and so I had a great family. I was very lucky, and so it serving as I did was very easy for me. It wasn't, there weren't any hard choices, really. So, if that answers your question.
Yeah.
Did you have another that you wanted to get in before we got into or getting into Vietnam?
Nope, I would defer to you, bud.
Okay. Well, we'll this kind of coincides with a little bit of the difference between battalion and force, and this will be a good question. Jason was curious, how many men would usually go out on a patrol, and what were the assigned roles for the team members?
Okay, good question. Usually it was a 6-man patrol. I, of course, was team leader. I had a point man. I walked deuce point. We generally patrolled in column, just because it was easier to hide that way and easier to move quietly, to move in the other guy's footsteps. You see what he has had to do. And behind me was my primary radio operator, and behind him, 1, 2, 3, 4 was a secondary radio operator, and then the 2 last guys, Taylor and Charlie, being the last, which was often forgotten, sadly. But he had an absolutely critical role, because it's easy to pick up a trail in the mud, for example, and he was responsible for rear security and wiping out any kind of tracks and stuff we left. So that was generally the way we were organized.
We've definitely heard here lately about the importance of having a damn good point man and a good and equally talented tail end Charlie, because as you said, picking up a trail, leaving a trail, that's the quickest way to get zapped, and just like walking into an ambush. So both of them had to be at the top of their game, so to speak.
Yep, the whole it was astounding, quite frankly, the way you become part of nature, and they tell you patrolling, move. You move. You're taught that you move as fast as the mission requires. If the mission says get to one place in a hurry, then you move fast. If you're a reconnaissance patrol, generally speaking, you generally move very slowly. The more you move like an animal, the better. And if you watch a deer moves, and this is what we all told the new guys, a deer moves very, very slowly, and he's very delicate with how he steps from one place to another. So no rapid movements. You're very delicate in the way you step. You watch where you're stepping. You watch where you're going. You're aware. You become one with nature, and you hear and you smell and you see, and quite literally you feel. That sixth sense is very, very important, and it's saved my rear end any number of times. But I think on my third patrol in the Quaison Mountains, and we were in a thicket, and we had come to a spot where on a finger, coming down a finger, there was a trench dug across the finger, and it was about 6 feet deep. And through that trench ran a very heavily used trail, and the trail came out of the finger, out of the trench, and about 20 feet, and took a hard left and went down the draw away from the trench. Well, we were in a thicket right there, right next to where the trench came out. And we'd sat there for a couple hours and nobody had come. So we said, heck, and I said, let's move on. So we were just coming out of the thicket. My point man had stepped out of the thicket and heard a noise. And he squatted very quickly on the edge of a big bomb
crater,
shell hole, and I was right behind him beside a tree, and I froze. And as it turned out, this guy walks out of the trench in a white shirt, starched white shirt, carrying a Browning high power, very cleanly oiled, etc. His pants, black pants, again, ironed and haircut, the whole 9 yards. This guy comes out of the trench, and right behind him come 28 more of these little buggers, all of them smoking and joking and laughing because they were in their rear and they felt safe. If they hadn't been that way, my point man wouldn't have hurt them, and we'd have been in deep trouble. But 28 guys come out, asshole of belly button, and smoking and joking and having a good time. And I smelled the one thing, the first time I'd seen bad guys, And for the first time, I smell these guys, and they smelled like phosphorus to me. And so forever that odor was uh, nailed in my brain. And there were several more occasions when I smelled that, and I knew we were around bad guys. But that was 28 guys walking past you that close, 15 feet. And my point man was squatted down on the edge of the shell hole. He was bare ass naked. And I at least had this tree kind of in front of me. And these guys just walked past. And we were very, very fortunate uh, that happened like that.
Holy hell. Wow. Yeah, I mean,
It turned out and I will let you know. It turned out that this guy was the commanding general of I Corps for the North Vietnamese Army. And this guy, I mean, he was right in his element, and he was leading his protection, his guard, special guard, 28 guys, and they were all in khakis and carrying M1 carbines, which I thought was funny, but that's what they were.
Damn, that is what. Did y'all report that up the chain and
Oh yeah.
ever figure out anything if they bombed the bejesus out of that area or?
Yeah, no, I went. The problem with the Quaisans was it's very steep, and so I didn't have radio contact, and so we went up the hill until we got radio contact. I reported it, and then it was up to me where I went from there. And I said, well, well-used trail. There's going to be some trail watchers waiting down the trail for anybody that might follow them. So I tried to stay up high and tried to locate where they were. So I walked around from mountain to mountain after that, trying to find the base camp where these guys might be, and never located it. So, I later walked back into one of our observation posts, and I never saw the general again, thankfully.
Jeez Louise. This will get another good story going, and I'm curious because you've got a lot of great photos of weapons. Where did that one go, Jason? Yeah. What weapon did you take on your first patrol, and what weapon did you take on your last? Were there anything else gear-wise that changed from your first to last? Yes.
That's a good question. This is one of my son's favorites.
Mine too.
I carried at first a MACV M16, the black rifle, and we carried those, and we were in the habit of using duct tape, green duct tape. We'd cut up odd shapes and put them on the forearm of the M16 to break up the outline of the rifle. But they were noisy as the dickens, and they were handy when compared to the M14, which it had replaced. But I'd always hankered for a Car 15, which is the shortened version of the M16 that the Army had. And of course, the Army had all kind of good stuff, but you didn't. The Marine Corps didn't have Car 15s. And maybe the generals did or the colonels did. I don't know. But I had made friends. I stayed in Thom Duck Special Forces Camp. Got marooned there for 3 days during a siege that Thornduck had during the monsoons. And so I made good friends with the Army captain who was head of the A team that ran Thornduck. And he later became the supply chief for Special Forces and I Corps. And I had great need, I thought, of a recoilless rifle. And I knew that the Special Forces had lots of recoilless rifles for their base camps. And so I called him up, and he and I also R&R together. Linda Hammerbecken was in Thailand, and so I got to see Linda, and this Army captain was there, and we dined and had a good time together. But so I called this guy up and said, "Hey, I need a recoilless rifle." And so in the process of swapping stuff that he needed, which amounted to off the book M16s that accumulated in battalion, I traded him a couple of those for a 57 millimeter recoilless rifle. And in the process of talking to him, I said, how do I get one of those Car 15s you guys have got? And he said, well, I'll swap. What else you got to swap? And I said, well, I had led a raid on a base camp in the tennis, what we call the tennis courts overlooking Hill 55. And lots of bad guys. And so I had raided a base camp there. It was a hospital, turned out. But I had slid down off a great big boulder and landed on the ground. And there, miraculously, in front of me was one of the greatest souvenirs of all time, a Tokarev pistol.
Yes.
With a leather holster, and with the belt with a North Korean star on it. I'm sorry, North Vietnamese star. And so there it was. So there I was. We fight wars not for anything, not for God and motherhood and apple pie, but for souvenirs. And so there I had this great souvenir. And so I grabbed the souvenir. And so I said, oh, if you can get me a Car 15, I'll swap you this brand new Tokarev in a holster with the North Vietnamese belt.
Wow.
Well, his eyes just lit up, and he was, because that was hot stuff. And so I made the trade, and he gave me a Car 15. Now, it was probably an M16. It was off the books that he had his armor cut down and had a shorten it up and put all the necessary stuff on it. But that's what I carried after that. And that was my favorite weapon. It was very easy to carry, and I think you have a picture of me with my Car 15.
Oh yes, we do. Where did it just pop down to? There's your old M16. Yep, there it is. You guys in the hooch with.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
Beautiful piece of equipment right there.
It just, everybody was jealous of me, of course, and that I had this Car 15, and of course since I was in that helicopter crash, I have no idea what happened to it, but it was a great piece of equipment, except that It didn't fire full automatic.
I was about to ask.
Yeah, which was a good thing because I didn't like for my guys to fire full auto anyway, because you use up ammo too fast. But I allowed my point man to fire full auto if he ran into a lot of bad guys, but the rest of us fired semi-auto, and so I fit right in.
That's awesome. Man, that's an AK-52 right there as well. I was looking at that. Y'all got some exotic weapon. Oh, the old BOR back there.
Good for you that you recognize that. We captured that out on the fence with Laos. That was way out in the boondocks, and that was a pretty neat looking piece of gear.
Yeah, that is. I've not seen many photos of guys in Vietnam with one of those. That's actually might be the only one I've seen, even with all the SF guys. That's a heck of a photo right there. Gosh, oh, speaking of A109 Thung Duck, would that captain you were speaking to, would that happen to be Captain John Wagner? Or was that maybe a different? He was there for a while.
That name does not ring a bell.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That I would love to get in touch with him if you're in touch with him, ask him if he was there late 69, early 70.
He may have just been full 70, but I will ask about the pistol, and that'll definitely ring the bell. But we've heard a lot about a Thung Duck from Rabbi Rick Rabinold, because they ran a few patrols around that area. So that's interesting. You guys were working out of there.
It was a hot area. It was forever under siege or being attacked or being mortared or whatever.
Oh yeah, they had that huge siege, like Jason said, in September 28th through the 30th of 68. 28 men lost their lives up there. That's it evidently was hot. And there were an interesting thing before we get to another question. People are always interested in funny animal stories, and I thought, since we were talking about Thung Duck, you actually had a quite interesting experience with what you thought was someone just screaming their guts out. Would you mind telling us about the animal you encountered that afternoon?
Sure. That was across the river from Thung Duck, and we found a heavily used trail, and so I was trying to find a spot to watch the trail. Well, I couldn't find a spot to watch the trail very well, except by climbing a tree. So I climbed a tree, and there I sat in the fork of a tree, and it was hot, and I went to sleep. I fell asleep, and not too good, 20 feet up in the air. But all of a sudden, this horrible scream. I mean, it sounded like a woman screaming in absolute terror. But it was a really loud and frantic scream. And of course, I grabbed tree limbs and woke up, fortunately, and grabbed a tree limb and looked down, and there on this trail, around this trail, were a half dozen peacocks. And I had never heard a peacock before, but I did, and those peacocks almost got me in trouble.
Short little tidbit. My uncle, he liked to claim he raised them, and Uncle Charles, if you watch this one day, I am not being mean, but he liked to claim he raised them, and but basically he would come out here on our 8 or so acres, and would dump off peacocks as he would get them, and we ended up with 4 or 5 at a time. And I had no idea about them. I knew they were beautiful. The males were beautiful with their spreads and everything, but they got old quick between their claws, wanting to get up on vehicles and scratching vehicles and crapping on them. And at the crack of dawn and every evening before they roost in their trees, they start screaming like that every evening and every morning. And it is terrible.
It really was. I'll tell you another couple of animal stories. Everything grew bigger in Vietnam.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, and so leeches were little, I thought. And on my first patrol, I was introduced to leeches because I looked at the ground, and it looked like the ground was moving. I mean, the whole ground was moving, and it was muddy, and these little brown things were going end over end like a slinky, and they would climb on your boots. And I mean, they were all over my boots, coming up my leg, looking for a place to eat. And so, inevitably, you would either brush up against a tree, or they get on your foot or whatever, and they'd find a way into your secret places. And so nighttime, you get set up at night or for the evening, not at night. But there are a couple of places that you aren't really well equipped to check, and so you'd pick somebody you had trust in and say, "How about checking out my special places?" And so they got to see the things that your mother hadn't seen, and it doggone things. And then we didn't smoke in the bush, so you used mosquito repellent, and mosquito repellent that they issued us didn't do squat for mosquitoes, but they would persuade leeches to let go. And so you'd squirt them, and depending upon where they were, that mosquito repellent could burn the dickens out of you or whatever. But it was never a fun thing. But that was something you did every evening. So, and every morning, because they'd be on you then too.
Jeez.
But they were good. I was being chased once by some counter recon guys. There were 14 bad guys dressed up in American fatigues or utilities, whichever you want to call them, with face carry and M16s, were following us. So I had gone into hiding in a thicket, as we normally did, that we called a harbor site, and we'd gone into harbor site into the thicket, and after dark, just in case he had seen where I was going, we crawled about 50, 60 yards to a bamboo thicket, crawled into the bamboo thicket and went to sleep. And one guy stays up for radio watch and for an hour, and then you wake up the next guy. So we crawled into this bamboo thicket, made our little circle, and went to sleep. And the next morning, in changing jobs, taking over radio watch, I never stood up. It was, just kind of, they hand you the radio, and you just kind of sit there with your back against your pack. So I never stood up. But the next morning, I woke up and I was on my back, and I looked up, and right over my head was this huge spider web. And I mean a huge spider was in the spider web. And this was, for those of y'all that are in the South, this was what we used to call a Chinese riding spider. You know, he would make his big spider web, and it looked like a Chinese hieroglyphic in the middle. But if I had stood up and come into close personal contact with that spider, I'd still been running. It was that just, oh gosh, it makes my skin crawl now.
Yeah, that's like the banana spiders I walk into out here walking the dogs. I just start taking clothes off and
oh geez, it's bad. The one other story I will tell that did that. We went into a place south of Nong Song Special Forces Camp, and we ended up trying to get into this place 2 days in a row, and got shot out both times on both of the landing zones that I had picked. So I picked a third one on a sandbar and in the river, in Nong Song River, and got off the helicopter, and of course you leave footprints, and so I headed off west, which is an area I wasn't going to go. Went in the water and circled back east, and went up, 100 yards in the water, climbed out on a rock so I wouldn't leave any footprints. And we crawled up through really thick brush and came upon a doggone trail about 3 feet wide with many muddy footprints. Well, all that, that just said we were in deep doo-doo. And we crossed the trail, brushed out our footprints and stuff, and went up a hill. Well, there were 2 hills on either side of the river, and it looked like a pair of breasts sticking up, almost like twins.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went crawling up, literally, because it was so thick, crawling up one of those hills. And this place had been Agent Oranged some years before, and it had killed off the big trees, and the big trees had fallen over, and they'd fallen over a crisscross pattern. And we got up to the top, and there was like a little fort up there, and hey, this is cool, because we got cover from enemy fire, and it was late in the day.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I said, okay, we'll harbor up right here in the middle of these trees. So we made our little circle and did our radio check and went to sleep. And about 11 o'clock,
Oh God!
the radio operator woke me up and said, Lieutenant, somebody's coming up the hill. And I said, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Well, nobody in his right mind is going to be following a recon team in the middle of the night up through that garbage, because you couldn't be quiet. So these guys were obviously confident enough that they were either kill crazy kamikaze ninjas from hell or what. But it sounded like 2 of them following exactly the same path that we had followed up the hill. Oh, crud. So I passed the word, okay, nothing but knives and grenades.
Oh,
Then we'll shoot. Because my thinking was, okay, they got machine guns set up on this other hill, and as soon as we open fire and they can locate us, then they'll open fire and blow us away with machine guns. So I said knives and grenades. Well, yeah, I don't know if anybody's ever gotten in a knife fight before, but just the thought of it, it's not one of those things you spend a whole lot of time thinking about. And we spent about 15 minutes in training on how to use a knife. And so your handy dandy Marine Corps combat K-bar knife, and sticking a guy, that's about it. But aside from that, you use it during K-bar to dig cat holes and help cut down trees and enlarge LZs and that kind of thing. But I passed word. Okay, this is strictly knives and grenades. So I took out my knife and I laid out a couple of grenades, and I lay there waiting for these guys to come up the hill. Well, sure enough, it sounded like you would if you were, bad guys trying to find other bad guys, the people you were hunting, and they would take a couple of steps and stop and listen. Take a couple of steps and stop and listen. Take a couple of steps and stop and listen. Well, what I'm hearing is my heart going ga-dung, 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 ga-dung.
Pucker factor.
But terribly loud. Thump, 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 thump. It just, it was that loud. And I'll be honest with you, I kept thinking, go to somebody else. Go step on somebody else, because I didn't want them stepping on me. Because all my troops, I think, stud muffin Marine Corps enlisted men will know how to do this. And darn if I was lying inside this little fort that was made by trees that had fallen over, and they had a big root ball, and the tree had fallen, and so that left space between the tree trunk and the ground as a result. So I hadn't thought about it, but now all of a sudden these two guys had walked up on the other side of the tree from me, and I said, "Well, crap! I'll just pull a grenade pin and drop it on the other side of the tree, and it'll go boom, and they'll be dead." But then I realized that, oops, there wasn't any place for me to hide, because there was open space between the tree trunk and the ground. So I'm sitting there with my knife, and I'm saying, well, these two guys have stopped right on the other side of the tree from me. They can either move on, or they can step over the tree trunk, and that'll be it. And then I've got to stand up and start sticking these two bad guys, or I can pull a John Wayne and go flying over the tree trunk, and take these two guys out and stab them as fast as and lethally as I can. So the thought, that's pretty crazy stuff, because you don't really, that you just never think about it. So I finally decided that that's what I would do. And so I thought, dear Mr. and Mrs. Fitzsimmons, your son Gene won the Congressional Medal of Honor because he dove over the tree trunk and landed in a squad of bad guys and stabbed and killed as many as he could and saved his team from destruction. So, I had this vision of what that was going to be like. And so I came up into a crouch. Now, when you move into a harbor site, you move all the twigs and the leaves out of the way so you don't make any more noise when you're moving around. And so I had done that. And so I had come up into a crouch and was over this tree trunk and stabbed these two guys, I hope two guys. And all of a sudden, there was a rump, and something big took off down the hill, taking trees and limbs, breaking it. It sounded like a bus going down the hill. And my heart's going, and it was really, I'm sure the rest of my troops were the same way. But this thing went downhill. It was obviously a big animal. What it was, I didn't know until the next morning. And the next morning, as soon as it got light, I, of course, looked over the tree trunk, and it had been a big-ass wild boar, and I mean big. I had hunted wild boar in western North Carolina, but this
We've got them down
this
here
was a
too.
granddaddy, and so I'd have gone flying over the log, me and my K-bar into the back of this wild boar, and God knows what had happened to me.
God, gone hog wild.
Yeah, good.
Oh, jeez, Louise.
That was wild. I will tell, since I'm on animals. I'll tell you my snake stories. No, this is just my wife's heard all these. We had heard on the way over about what was called a two-step snake.
Oh yeah.
And everybody had heard about the two-step snake, and it'd be up in a tree, and it would lean over and bite you on the neck or something, and you were good for 2 steps, and then you'd fall over dead. Well, I spent my first 3 months, I'm scared to death of snakes. Spent my first 3 months looking for this two-step snake, and never saw one. Son of a gun. And then I think right before Christmas, we were going up a place called Charlie Ridge, which was a bad place. And there out in the middle of the trail was a skull. And so I'm thinking, great place for an ambush. Marines cluster around the skull, and the bad guys open up. So I got everybody spread out, and I went to look at the skull and discover whether there was an ambush or not. Well, my primary radio operator goes to the right. He was to break right, and looked into a log and found a snake rolled up in this log. And I've taken about 2 steps toward this skull at this point. And my radio operator, completely oblivious, to any ambush there might have been, dives into this hollow log and grabs the snake.
Oh God!
And pulls the snake out.
Jesus!
And it's about a 6-foot long boa constrictor. It said, Lieutenant, this is a regal boa. I've been looking for one of these. I'm sitting here looking around, waiting for the 439th NVA regiment to jump out of the weeds and start shooting. And this idiot got this damn 6-foot snake in his arms. And God, you got to be kidding me. Well, it wasn't an ambush, thankfully. And this guy wanted to keep this boa constrictor, which he identified as a regal boa. He wanted to keep this regal boa and wanted to know if he could carry it on patrol with him. Well, he's a primary radio operator. Okay, so he's got He's got all his food, extra ammo, all that other stuff, plus a radio battery, and he says, "Oh, the guys will carry all my gear, and I'll carry him in my packs, and I won't. I'll take care of him." So I had a hell of a time convincing him that he was not going to get to keep that Regal boa constrictor for the rest of the patrol in a pack near me. It just wasn't going to happen.
No.
So he forever. I doubt seriously if he ever forgave me for that. So that was.
I mean, he could have gone into the Ville and bought him one to have as a mascot at camp.
Probably could have, except we couldn't go. We were not allowed to go into the villages or into Da Nang. It was.
You should have put him in with Silver Star for diving into that lodge.
I was about to say, jeez. Either bravery or stupidity thinking it wasn't going to be poisonous. Either way, I'm not wanting to come face to face with a boa either way.
Yeah. It was unreal. And so I made him put the boa constrictor back. And it was still the monsoon, so the boa constrictor was kind of cold and lethargic.
Trying to get warm.
He was not a happy boa constrictor when he got yanked out.
How are you doing on your iPhone battery, Mr. Gene? We're coming up on an hour 45 here.
We're about 60%.
Oh, a lot better than I thought. Okay. This comes up. This is going to be asking about men you served with, and one interesting Marine that we'll bring up after ended up becoming a general officer. But Jason is curious about who was the biggest and who was the smallest Marine that you ever went out on a mission with.
Another good question.
Well, I was the smallest Marine, okay?
Wow.
That is the shortest.
His nickname was Short Round.
Yeah. My platoon sergeant and platoon commander at OCS and the basic school called me Short Round. And that was so I was the littlest guy around, which was not bad because I got to the ground faster than the biggest guy. The biggest guy was my platoon sergeant, Sergeant Titus. Titus, though he was a big. I mean, he was a stud muffin. You wouldn't want to tangle with him. There was another officer in our company named John Hoff, who was about 6'4". And Hoff and I looked like Mutt and Jeff. He was probably, no, he wasn't. He wasn't in that picture. There you go. We're kidding there. I'm standing on the rock. He's not. I had to get that way. Well, good. You were well versed in the pictures.
I think Hoff is holding the BAR in that previous photo too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Nap, a question about photos will come up. Nap has helped us out greatly with your photos, and as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and ask about that. Jason said, thankfully, Nap has shared some of your great photos. What made you think to take so many pictures while in country, and what kind of camera did you have, and did you send all of them back home, or did you keep them there to take home?
Good question. I used a number of cameras. You could get 35 millimeter cameras, good 35 millimeter cameras, cheap in Vietnam, in the PX. So the good pictures I had were from my quote unquote good 35 millimeter camera that didn't make it home with me. So it didn't, I got to think somebody in Okinawa picked up a 35 millimeter camera free. But for a time, I carried a 16 millimeter, an 8 millimeter, a dinky camera. And I don't know if NAP has any of those. It didn't give you the panorama that a bigger camera did. But I carried the little one because it was so light and easy to carry. Later, I got just your basic one each cartridge camera, as well as my 35 millimeter. And I admit that when I got ambitious, when I was on a patrol that wasn't likely to have a contact, I took my good 35 millimeter. If I was on a patrol that was likely to have contact, that was extra weight that I didn't want, and I would carry ammo or whatever, but not my good 35 millimeter camera. But the other, camera happy, is that a right word? But we like to take pictures. I have a friend who is retired lieutenant general, who is head of the Marines Operation Desert Storm, and he carried a camera wherever he went when he was. Yeah, there you go, Earl Hales, great guy. Earl carried a camera and was forever taking pictures. I would see him on Memorial Day because we're laying a wreath at the Marine Corps Museum at the 1st Recon Battalion Monument. So, but he was a good guy, and we forever take pictures.
Shutterbugs.
I didn't. I sent some home, not a whole bunch. I kept most of them, and fortunately, I made it back with my gear, with my clothing and stuff. So nobody bothered.
I've heard some horror stories of guys' photos being outright stolen at the camps or when they're trying to get out of country, and it just makes me furious. Furious.
That would make anybody furious. But yeah, I was fortunate.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. We've got 1, 2, 3 fairly good questions. Well, they're all good questions, but 3 that are pertaining to what we're talking about. And then Nap, if you wanted to jump in here. I know we're probably gonna go about 2 hours or so. We'll definitely do a part 2, guys. We don't want to eat up all of our time here and go for 4 hours on the first one. But
take an intermission.
Yeah, yes, sir. And we don't want him holding his iPhone for over 2 hours. He's being so kind to be with us right now. These first 3 quick ones. Daniel's interested. He does a lot of. He does all of my my emblems, all of my photos and profile pictures and all of that for the shows. He's very good. I don't even know what you would call that. Digital artist. I'm having a mind blank on what I can call him. But Daniel was curious. Which fatigue camo pattern did you like best? The OD green, the ERDL, the tiger, and which one, in your opinion, was best for working in the jungles?
ERDL was excellent. It was just super. You blend right into the greens and the shadows and stuff, and it was quite good if you were in the jungle. I had tiger stripe, and I wore tiger stripe on occasion, mostly when I was in an area where there was a lot of grass, because it seemed to hide in the shadows better. I did not like the OD green, so in those two, the tiger stripe and the ERDL were my favorites. So ERDL, I've had people look at me from 10 feet away. I mean, those 28 guys that came walking out of that cut in the finger there to my right. You know, a lot of guys looked right over at me and my point man, and I just, you know, I was frozen. I, you know, did not move, and believe me, everything in me wanted to say either turn around and run like hell, or open fire. And I think that one patrol there won me my stripes with my platoon, because I didn't move, you know, and they knew they'd been around, and they knew that standing stock straight still was the way to be. But I had people look at me and not ever see me. And if you think about it, you know, if you don't look for people, you don't see them, even in a crowd. So,
especially if you're not expecting them to be in the bushes right there in front of you.
Yeah.
Right. You're operating in their backyard.
Absolutely. I just brought up the kid bit off since I had this photo up before we get to a question pertaining to what you were just speaking about. There's some camo, but did y'all use KCS scouts
Yes.
regularly?
We had Kid Carson scouts with the battalion. This was mine. This was ours. Excuse me. And he was a former NVA gunnery sergeant.
Oof, wow.
Who, with his wife, who was a former VC, saw the light around Quezon when they were getting the Dickens bombed out of them, and came over. I did not. One, it was an extra man. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you got an extra man that's going to be moving, and he was in ERDL camouflage like we were, but it was just an extra man, and I was really happiest with fewer people. So he was on. I used him on probably 5 patrols, and on one, he stepped into a canal down near Thong Duck, that same patrol where I saw the flamingos. But he stepped into what appeared to be a very narrow, 3-foot wide canal, and just disappeared in the water, and he was swept away. And I dropped everything I had and ran down the canal and grabbed him by the back of the shirt and saved him. But he was, he was on his way to being washed out to sea. He'd have been swept down to the river, and he couldn't swim. No. So,
oh my God,
he and I became bosom buddies after that. He thought I was a cat's ass.
I was about to say you were probably his head honcho and go-to guy for a long time after that.
Well, he invited me to have dinner with him and his wife, and so we borrowed a Jeep, my platoon sergeant and I, and we went and had dinner. Had no idea what it was we were eating.
Probably best you didn't.
Yeah, and my kid Carson and his wife, who did not speak English, seemed to be laughing it up an awful lot.
Oh Lord.
We giggled about what it's probably the neighbor's cat or dog or whatever. And then we played cards, and of course they spoke Vietnamese, and they're talking, they're having conversations probably, how many aces have you got, have you got any red 10, actually we lost cards, so it was funny. It was funny, but we used them a fair amount. Other guys in the company used him as well, and so it was he was busy.
I can imagine with what y'all are doing and what I've read about them. They were some were not as gung ho once they crossed over like your gentleman was. I've heard some bad stories about some, but they definitely seem to get in there and mix it up from what I've read in the books and such.
Well, he was a first class guy. He was a good guy. So I could never complain about him. We had
Dad, not to interrupt, but you're covering the camera. Oh, there you go.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, since I've got a face for radio, you guys probably happier with that. But later we were training. We trained some Koreans.
Oh yes.
In reconnaissance tactics. They were first class. They were hard rocks, man. Yep, there you go. That's lieutenant on the left, or my right, your right, and his platoon sergeant or his gunnery sergeant. They were first class troops. And
I like that frog.
I do too.
Pattern too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was good. That was good camo pattern. And I took the gunny on patrol with me, and had an interesting experience. We were being followed by some bad guys, and I don't know whether they were being followed or not. That's not fair to say. We were going the same way the bad guys were, and we were coming down a little tributary to a bigger stream, and then went up the bank, and we're going along the river, and we had gone about 35, 50 yards down the river and set up to have lunch. And then we heard bad guys. And so I took the gunny and we grabbed some extra grenades, and we went back, sneaking back the way we had come, and got up at the top of the bank, and there were about 15 bad guys sitting around having lunch. And the fact that they were so relaxed tells me that they weren't following us, that they were just having a good time. But I didn't want to take a chance. So since they were in this stream bed with high banks, we started throwing grenades down into the tributary. And then we didn't stick around to see how the grenades worked. Grenades are overrated. Okay. Except maybe in a room. But we didn't stick around to count noses afterwards. And so we threw about a half dozen grenades, and then got back up and headed back to the team. Well, then we ran into some more bad guys down the river, and so we had to be extracted as such, and so we had an emergency extraction after that, and it was interesting. The Koreans thought this was a blast. This was great. they wanted to stay and run recon patrols with recon. So they were first class people.
Yeah, we've heard tales of how hardcore they were from both Marines and SF men alike. Just utter hardcore guys.
Yeah.
I'll do two more quick ones that we've got. And guys, if we don't get to all of yours, I'm writing them down. But we're probably going to hold hard after this 2-hour mark, because I don't want to take and make the captain hold his phone for 2 hours and Nap's been with us for 2 hours as well. So we will do a part two, guys. I promise y'all.
That's not the holding issue at this point, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's holding something else is the issue.
You'll probably be okay.
Yeah. Okay. These two, and we'll let Nap maybe ask or say something if he'd like to close out for the day. 3 stars is curious about, as I was earlier with the general. Do you think there were more than 28 with him, or did they perhaps have more where they had just left in tunnels somewhere, or what do you think was going on with that 28 and with the general?
That trail led into a couple of villages around. God darn it, I can't remember the name of the island, but it was the most heavily booby-trapped area in Vietnam. And we ran a fixed observation post at Hill 120 or Hill 425, overlooking that island, and it was always very busy, and they were calling artillery strikes and stuff on these guys all the time. But those villages down below that were all VC NVA controlled. So those 28 guys that he was with, I was told later, were strictly his personal bodyguard. And so he had apparently been out visiting the troops and on his way into the Quaisans. And I have no idea what base camp he was going to there, but the Quaisans were crawling with bad guys too. They were always very busy.
We've read from numerous books, and we're going to have a guy on from First Force that had some. They named the front four. I'm sure you heard that the proposed leadership that were hiding out in the Quaisans. They thought they came across them, and they got in some hellacious firefights. So they were lucky to get out of alive, to be quite frank.
Well, you could bet, you could have a pretty good bet that you're going to make contact in the Quaisans, just because you were limited. They were so steep that you were on the ridge lines or you were in the draws. Mm-hmm. And that's where, the water was, that's where the trails were. And so, you were walking the trails, and that was always very dangerous.
Gosh, that's and that's exactly what he said. It's basically a shooting gallery. If you're not doing the shooting, you're getting shot up.
Yep. It was very busy.
Okay, here we'll do one more and let Nap, if he's got anything to say, and we'll call it a day because we're over 2 hours now. Did Battalion Recon have team names like we see with Force and MACV-SOG?
All right, say that again for me, please.
Did you guys have team names or like MACV-SOG and the Force Recon
Yeah,
guys?
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. We had radio call signs that that uh, that we had that were strictly with the battalion, and I'm sure Forts had their guys, their call signs as well. I'm not real familiar with the Force call signs. We had things like Pennywise, Flaky Snow. Flaky Snow was my favorite, and it seemed that always every time that I had a team that was given Flaky Snow, they hit the poop, and so I always wanted to be with them, just because I didn't want them to hit the shit without me.
Wow.
So
What a leader.
that was so Flaky Snow was my favorite. Pennywise,
Like that.
golly, I can't remember any other ones. So if that answered his question,
Absolutely.
I hope it did.
That was perfect. Nap, do you have any questions or anything you'd like to say before we close out for part one?
I had one question. First, I wanted to note Flaky Snow is actually my Xbox Live profile name.
Oh wow, I
So
love
the
that.
name lives on. But Dad, you mentioned earlier in one of your stories.
Hang on. My ferocious guard dog is after somebody.
Got a visitor.
Oh, geez. Somebody's at the door.
We can wait till part two, bud, if you want to do
Okay.
that.
We'll go ahead and close down for part one. We're almost at 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I want to thank both of y'all for sitting down with us. I'll get back with both of y'all so we can set up a part two. And guys, I've written down all of y'all's questions. And
That'd be great. And thank you for including my son. I'm touched that he was so interested that he would do that. Aha.
I was very glad he was joining us. And if it's all right, we'll probably have you back for part two, Nap, if you'd like to.
Sure thing.
Well, he has been struck by the same ugly bug that I was.
Indeed.
You're too hard. You're too hard on yourselves.
I
blame him, so it's easy.
Yeah, there you go. I was about to say he's the fall guy in all this.
Yeah.
We'll set this up for part two, and I can't thank y'all both again for spending over 2 hours with us today. And I hope y'all have a wonderful afternoon. And I'll keep y'all abreast of how this is going, and we'll get part two set up.
All right. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it, and I didn't get to meet everybody, but thank you all very much for your interest in what we were doing here, guys.
We'll have a part two to get you more get you more in touch with the viewers. So we'll be looking forward.
I hope Nap's got all the dirty pictures.
We'll be good.
That he'll share next time.
All righty, guys. I hope y'all have a good morning. Or good afternoon, and I'll be in touch with y'all.
All right,
Thanks,
great.
bud.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yep. See y'all.